This edition of Monocle on Saturday was first broadcast on the 1st of November 2025. Hello, I'm Georgina Godwin, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. This is Monocle on Saturday. Coming up on today's show, we'll have a look through the week's news and culture with cultural historian and author Gavin Plumley. And I'm very excited to tell you he also has a brand new puppy, which of course we are going to talk about. Then we look back at the autumn art season with the UK director of the Affordable Art Fair, Hugo Barclay. That's all ahead here on Monocle on Saturday. First, the news. Ukraine accuses Russia of striking substations that supply external power to nuclear plants, with the IAEA warning that disrupted grid connections pose a serious nuclear safety risk. Several plants temporarily lost power lines and one reduced output, underscoring the vulnerability of nuclear facilities amid ongoing military activity. Tanzania's electoral body says President Samia Suluhu Hassan won Wednesday's election with almost 98% of the vote, prompting deadly unrest, a curfew and internet restrictions after opposition candidates were excluded. The UN has called for an inquiry into alleged killings, while the government rejects accusations of abuses and insists the situation is under control. Mark Carney says he apologised to Donald Trump after a Canadian political ad quoting Ronald Reagan on tariffs angered the US president, who responded with new duties and halted trade talks. Ottawa is now managing the fallout from what began as a playful domestic political message, but escalated into a cross-border dispute. And a class action over Reese's pumpkin-shaped chocolates has been amended after an initial dismissal, with plaintiffs now arguing they paid a price premium based on packaging that showed jack-o'-lantern faces. Maker Hershey disputes the claim, saying reasonable consumers would not expect carved chocolate pieces, and the court will now decide whether the case proceeds. Either way, it's a stark reminder that at Halloween, even the sweet treats can come back to haunt you. And that's your Monocle Radio News. Hello and welcome to Monocle on Saturday. I'm Georgina Godwin and I'm joined in the studio by my friend Gavin Plumley. He's a cultural historian and an author, most recently of A Home for All Seasons. But Gavin, you're working on a new one.
I am writing, well, not right now, but I have been this week, drafted another chapter of my next book, which is called The Gay Apocalypse. And it's about Vienna at the turn of the last century and the lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans community in the Austro-Hungarian Empire just before the First World War. So that's going to be out in, well, if I actually finish it, it should be out in 2027. Little Brown's publishing it here, and Malden Styria are publishing it in the German-speaking world. Yeah,
it sounds absolutely fascinating. Just remind us about A Home for All Seasons, your first book. Although I know, of course, we did a Meet the Writers interview on it. People can listen back to that.
It was a much more local concern, and very local to me, because it's about my own house, which is an Elizabethan cottage out in the English countryside, and using that house as a way of looking at the world when it was built, why it was built, what was going on, fights within Europe, slightly dodgy royals, stuff that we don't really know anything about today. It's, although distant, very present.
Yeah. Now, at the top of the show, I teased the fact that we would be talking about your puppy. You've got a Sprocker.
We have a second Sprocker Spaniel now.
And that's a cocker bred with a Springer Spaniel.
Yeah. He looks like a spaniel, like a sort of general field spaniel, I suppose. And he's black. He's got a nice little white bib, and he's now coming up for 15 weeks. And we have our work absolutely cut out, not least because we have two. So introducing him to his older brother has been joyful, stressful, We'll get through it.
Do you know, but watching your Instagram, it's been really, really useful to me because as a Springer Spaniel owner, I keep thinking, oh, I'd really like to get another. And then I see you and other people who've got little puppies, and I remember what absolute nightmare they can be.
Yeah, they look absolutely adorable, of course, and you fall for that immediately. We were introduced to the breeder of this particular dog by my husband's assistant, and she, for her sins and many other people's, showed us photographs. And of course, you can't then ignore that. And you certainly can't ignore it when you go and sit in a pile of urine-soaked sawdust with 8 puppies crawling over you. And of course, I had to take one. But yeah, the reality is different, and you have to be very, very methodical with it, and have to stick to a timetable, stick to a routine, and be a little draconian, which is not necessarily what you think you should be.
What's his name?
He's called Scudder.
Ah, Forster.
Yeah, from Forster's Morris. He's the gamekeeper, and in fact his breeder was a sort of gamekeeper farrier person, so it sort of seemed quite opposite.
Yeah. Well, as you say, he can be a menace, and you are having to dictate terms. Well, let's talk about authoritarianism with that not very subtle link, because there's been a great piece by David Lammy in The Statesman, and he is actually saying all is not lost in terms of the creep to the right.
No, it's a wonderful piece. It's an optimistic piece, and it comes from, I think, a position within the British Labour Party, which has actually been quite rare since they won the election, which is the idea of optimism and good news. Keir Starmer doesn't seem to be particularly good at spreading good news, but here David Lammy, as his Deputy Prime Minister, is really kind of bringing lots of threads together internationally, speaking about the fact that, populism isn't winning everywhere. He's looking at Canada. He's looking at a whole host of Britain's allies in the world, and saying, look, please believe that, well, as he says about the local concerns, that reform hasn't won this, that we're not inevitably going to slide over there. He says our opponents want us to believe that the populist right is a worldwide rising tide. And he said, actually, in dozens of countries, that is not the case. And
yeah, this is the figure. He said that there have been 23 elections in the past year across the West. The left and the centre have won more than half of these.
Yeah, and the populist right is nowhere near close. I think that's a really, because we do get into these cycles, we do get into these spirals. All of us do that, and really good newspaper editors are not immune to that either. That we perpetuate narratives because, of course, we want to draw links. It's what we do around this table on a Saturday morning, Georgina. But it's actually, we need to kind of bed down into the detail and see individual cases and also individual personalities. Viktor Orban is losing his grip on Hungary, one of the sort of bedrocks, as it were, of the populist right in Central Europe, Eastern Europe, looking out, to Russia. So actually, and we have this week, David Lammy doesn't directly address this because obviously this is ongoing news, but we have that in the Dutch elections where Rob Jetten, who is a 38-year-old leader of the Dutch centrist party D66, is now poised to become the Netherlands' youngest and indeed first openly gay prime minister. And that is, it's not a landslide. It's a very equal share with the far-right Freedom Party there. But it is a positive story, and we have to take the positives. We don't necessarily need to be Pollyanna-ish about these things and think that everything's going to be okay. There is a fight for good thought at hand, but it is, I think it is interesting to see that. Now,
regarding the Netherlands elections, what many people are most excited about is the new Prime Minister's hot Argentinian hockey-playing boyfriend.
Well, okay, I'm not immune to eye candy. I'm not going to be sort of, very pure about this. Though I probably wouldn't go quite as far as Mark Smith does in The Times. I've fallen for the new Euro pin-up Rob Jetten and his hot fiancée, as you say, an Argentinian hockey player, and what's not to like there? He's young, handsome and gay. I'm in political heaven. Well, I think I'm slightly more in political heaven because the populists haven't got through. But it's always nice to, when you turn on the television, when you open your newspaper, to have handsome, beautiful people to look at.
Absolutely. Now, this idea of homosexuality in public life, of course, it's kind of completely acceptable now, but it hasn't always been that way. And it's one element that strikes me as missing in this Prince Andrew story, because if the chatter is to be believed, and indeed, if you go back and read people like John Boyne, who gave a very clear description of what was clearly Prince Andrew in his book, I think it was either Earth or Water, certainly it's contained in his collection called The Elements. That is a bit that seems to be missing from that story. That story's so much bigger now than just British royalty.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, all the headlines at the moment are absolutely dominated by this, not Prince Andrew Mountbatten Windsor story, having been stripped of his princedom. But it is a global story. I don't think we need to get bothered necessarily by the minutiae of which particular cottage on the Sandringham estate he's going to live in. I love the idea that punishment means a six-figure sum and a cottage in a very lovely part of Norfolk. But Andrew Lowney addresses this in Entitled, which I've been listening to on Audible as I've been driving around the country, going to various literary festivals and talks over the last month. And in fact, it's quite clear in that, he's no fan of Andrew, that there was a homosexual element to his life, particularly when he was in the Navy. I mean, what a surprise that the sailors were up to all sorts.
Legal at sea after 90 days.
Is that right?
Isn't that what the rule used to be?
Well, you're going on the Queen Mary, so maybe you'll discover these things directly. I don't know. Supposedly there are gay
I'm
drinks.
Taking my boyfriend.
Oh, God, I know. Sorry, that wasn't talking about you, but you'll be sailor adjacent was what I was saying. No, it's I think the thing with this Andrew story is that, there are so many rabbit holes you can go down. Whether the princesses are going to keep their titles, where's Fergie going to live, all of that sort of stuff. But actually, at the core of this is a very, very serious wrongdoing. Well, apparent wrongdoing, innocent until proven guilty, but it just doesn't stack up. And it does echo with major global political picture. With Trump returning from China this week, he's going back into elections on Tuesday. Minor elections, though, certainly perhaps the canary in the coal mine for the future. And this week, both in The Guardian and in the New York Times, JP Morgan warned that there was $1 billion in Epstein transactions possibly related to human trafficking. And I thought that sort of idea of the trafficking of this story really finds so many overlapping spheres. Trump, Epstein, obviously the royal family. It stinks.
And the fact that the royal family have finally cut him loose suggests that there is something much, much bigger coming, possibly his arrest.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I'm less inclined to view it as a cutting loose. When your brother, brackets, the king, close brackets, is still supporting you, still giving you property, it doesn't feel like a cutting. It's a very public cutting loose, but the very strange public and private money that is in the royal family, the Duchy of Lancaster, the Duchy of Cornwall, who owns what, the fact that Sandringham's not owned by the Crown, but it is owned by the King. It's so opaque that actually all of this needs unravelling, as well as the case to be brought, I would say, against Prince Andrew, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor.
Yeah. So this $1 billion in trafficking, that's potentially extremely serious.
Yeah. I mean, it's... And of course, that goes absolutely directly to, Epstein's relationships with two US presidents, not just with Trump, but also with Bill Clinton. And this was announced to the previous Trump administration in 2019 that there were a huge number of suspicious entries within the accounts just weeks after Epstein was found dead in a New York jail cell. So there is a lot to be unpacked here. And it's something that Trump has tried to obviously shoo away. There's nothing to do with him, despite all evidence to the contrary. And I think, money talks. And when JP Morgan is flagging that up, I think it may get worse.
There's a really interesting thing here. So Michael Wolff, who wrote Fire and Fury, he's written 3 books about Donald Trump. He extensively interviewed Epstein before his death. He has been trying to make the link between Melania, Trump and Epstein. And there's photographic evidence that the 3 of them knew each other. What's happened there is that Melania's slapped a $1 billion legal case on him. He is fighting back so that he can subpoena them to give evidence in court. And this is where I think we may finally find out what that link is. Of course, that's going to be very expensive. He's appealing for funds to do that. If you want to know more about Michael Wolff, again, go back to our Meet the Writers archive. He talks extensively, not about this bit because that hadn't broken at that point. I asked him, in fact, aren't you afraid of being sued? And he said, no, because Trump hates Murdoch so much that I'm never allowed on Fox News, so Trump supporters don't know who I am. That's all changing now.
Hiding
obviously.
In plain sight.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go back, though, to this figure of $1 billion. Melania's suing Wolff for $1 billion. We're looking at that $1 billion in child trafficking, but also $1 billion billed as the world's largest archaeological facility dedicated to a single civilization. This is the new museum opening outside Cairo today.
The Grand Egyptian Museum, located a mile away from the pyramids at Giza. And I think the pyramids, through this enormous window, reflecting back on the collection within this space, and a part of a whole infrastructure project, seemingly in Egypt, with the opening of a new underground system. I mean, a vast amount of money being spent, but why not? When you've got this absolutely extraordinary collection, we are beguiled by that enormous civilization, culturally so rich, linguistically, and vast sculptures. One of Ramesses II, towering above visitors. You can see in the photographs that are included in the Guardian's report on it. There's an exhibition space, a children's museum, all sorts of things in there. I've never been to Egypt.
Oh, I haven't. I mean, I have to say that, this was several years ago, but my honeymoon was very odd. When on your honeymoon you've made a mistake, that's a problem. But I liked Egypt. But the pyramids were slightly at that time, a bit scuzzy. You didn't feel particularly safe.
Right.
It was, and so the idea that this has been made into really making the best of Egypt's cultural heritage is wonderful. But let's cross from ancient art to modern, because despite a slump in the art market last year, the global art market has shown signs of recovery. So alongside Frieze in London and Art Basel in Paris, the Affordable Art Fair welcomed 20,000 visitors to its Battersea Autumn Edition recently, signalling robust demand for accessible contemporary art. Early reports indicate strong sales, collectors and newcomers alike buying and showing a growing appetite for sculpture and mixed media in particular. Well, I'd like to know more about that. So on the line now is the UK Director of the Affordable Art Fair, Hugo Barclay. Hugo, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Tell us about the trends from the recent fair.
Yeah, so we were our fair opened the same week as Frieze. There were 7 other fairs in London that week, and it's looking really promising. Obviously, we at Affordable Art Fair. People who come to the fair can buy art from a few £100s up to £10,000 and everything in between. But it's looking really positive at this price point. So we don't have the final figures from the last fair in terms of total art sales. But what I can say from the 2 other fairs that we run in the UK is that there was a 16% growth in our total sales from the last 2 fairs. So that's looking very promising at this price point. And as you alluded to earlier, we've seen an increase in sculpture and mixed media. So people buying sculpture went up by 35% for this edition and 27% for mixed media.
Who's buying?
Well, everybody really who comes to our fair. So we saw 20,000 people come through our doors, and it's the people who come to our fair are people who are looking to buy art and collect art for their homes. We also have a lot of interior designers who come and art advisors who come for their clients.
And tell us more about the international artist highlights, because you did have several of those too.
Yeah, so affordable art fairs across borders. So we have 18 fairs worldwide. We opened a fair in Berlin, Vienna last year, in Austin, and then this year we opened in Boston, and next year we're also opening in Houston. But yeah, we have a pretty extensive footprint. And we've also seen an uplift, as I said, in London, but we also saw that uplift in New York and Brussels also. So it's looking like it's not just a one-off in London, but there is some recovery at this price point across our fairs.
And when you talk about this price point, what figures are we talking about?
So around 50% of the art sold at our fair is under £500. So it's, you're looking at first-time buyers buying, very accessible works and original works, and then it goes all the way up to £10,000.
I was reading India Knight's book, Home, recently, and she was talking about having art on the wall and how basically you could frame anything. If it's meaningful to you, it's going to give you joy, you should put it there. She was also extolling the virtue of posters, saying people are very kind of sniffy about them. How do you feel about that kind of art?
I think anyone can have anything on their walls that brings them meaning and joy and hope, and so for us at Affordable Art Fair, we have quite strict exhibiting criteria for our galleries participating. So we don't allow open editions or posters to be sold. We feel, for us at least, that the visitors that come through our doors need to be purchasing work that has some intrinsic value. So we, as of next year, our edition size is 100, the maximum. So you can certainly buy works on paper and photographs, but there is a maximum edition size that our galleries can bring.
Right, a limited print run. Tell me about the importance of platforming emerging artists. How significant is being included in something like this for somebody at the beginning of their career?
It's so significant. First and foremost with art fairs, everything is about the galleries participating. So we work with 100 galleries that participate per edition. But as well as that, we have additional programming. And one of the things that we do is we have a graduate exhibition every autumn. And so we work with a curator who in the summertime went around many of the art schools in the UK. And for this exhibition, she showcased 30 artists from 12 different art schools across the UK. So this is often an exhibition like this, a couple months after finishing your degree show is often the first really quantitative exhibition and thing that you can work towards, and accessing a platform with 20,000 visitors coming through the door is invaluable to them. So we're really proud of doing that, and then also with our galleries. And one of the things that we do is we do our best to encourage all of the galleries participating to bring new artists and to represent new artists at the fair. So since I've been measuring this data point over the last couple of years, it's always sort of hovered around the sort of 18 to 22% of artists participating that are represented by our galleries being new to each edition. But for this edition, it went up to 35%. So we're really, really proud of that number. It's really important for our visitors that come to our fair. And then we want them obviously to come back to the fair edition on edition to feel like the fair is fresh and there's new work to see and there's new artists to discover.
Hugo, absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. That's Hugo Barclay, who's director at the Affordable Art Fair. Gavin Plumley is still with me in the studio. Gavin, there's a new UBS report which ties in with what Hugo was saying. It says that Gen Z collectors, I think we have to say Z, even though we say Z normally, Gen Z collectors now allocate an average 26% of their wealth to art, and female collectors outspent men by 46%. I mean, those are extraordinary figures, right?
Well, there are a whole host of extraordinary figures in this report, including the fact that $83 trillion will pass between the generations over the next few decades. Little wonder that inheritance tax is a major topic of concern for governments at the moment. And I think that kind of liquidity is obviously then finding a home in collecting. One of the other things I really like about this report is, Pache, things like the Affordable Art Fair and Frieze and so on and so forth, is actually the number of people who are buying directly from artists, which is rather cheering. Up to 27% 63% of collectors last year purchased directly from artists, and that's up on figures from before in 2022. So I love that idea that it's becoming, much more direct as well, that, people can actually choose someone they really love, really want to back, and away from, those slightly splashy fairs and the amount of coverage that Frieze gets, which is fabulous, and some really glorious things that were on show there. But also the idea that someone working in their garden shed is actually being patronised by people who have that money, have that ready capital coming down from the boomers, I think is a really beautiful story.
Now, this is really referring to modern art and not sort of classical paintings that were done a couple of hundred years ago.
Yeah, which is where when I have money or when I have space on my credit card, that's where normally I spend my money. That's what's hanging on my walls at home. I tend to go through auction houses, finding little gems. But that is also, of course, supporting the very same structure. So. But it is, new creativity. Let's back people who are, going against the trend, going against AI, going against the, STEM subjects and compulsory sciences, and actually doing work that reflects the human condition. Art, literature, music. We should be behind them. And this is a lovely thing to read.
I want to look at an artwork that actually began in 1883. I guess you could call it an artwork, although it's actually a piece of architecture. And the person that designed it, it's 100 years since he died. I am speaking, of course, about Gaudi and the Sagrada Familia, which has finally entered its tallest phase, at least.
Yeah, well, it's just beat Ulm Minster in Germany to be the world's tallest church. The central spire of La Sagrada Familia should be an enormous cross. And judging by some of the footage I've seen this week, they basically put in place the first bit of the plinth that will rise up. And in so doing, it now stands at 162 metres and 91 centimetres. Which is, I'm not going to do the maths live on air because my mental arithmetic is absolutely appalling, but Ulm is at 161 metres and 53 centimetres. So it's, it's not a huge amount. In fact, the Times calls it by a whisker, but it's a wonderful statement, really. And the commitment to that building has been extraordinary. I'm sure many people listening have been to it. But every time you go back, something is new. In fact, 4.9 million people visited it last year.
And that's a problem because Barcelona is really trying to rein back on that kind of mass tourism.
Yeah, and I find that it's such a toxic topic, tourism in Barcelona. Particularly railing against Airbnbs and other sort of letting agencies for short-term stays. But actually, it is also feeding this stuff. And if you really believe in the building, well, either pay for it yourself and bar tourists, or let the tourists in and they can support the creation of this absolutely glorious statement by one of the most ingenious and indeed completely lunatic architects. It's a wild building.
It absolutely is. Gavin, that's all we've got time for, but thank you so much for being with me. Thanks also to Hugo Barclay and our producer and studio engineer, Mariella Bevan. Monocle on Saturday will return at the same time next weekend. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.